Star Trek theory: if this character didn't turn traitor, they'd be first officer of Kirk's Enterprise replacement. When people talk about the great what-ifs of Star Trek, the conversation often circles around familiar questions. What if Spock had chosen to remain captain of the Enterprise at the end of the Wrath of Khan? What if Jean-Luc Picard had declined Starfleet's command offer after his Stargazer years? What if Sisko had refused the emissary mantle? But one of the most intriguing what-ifs lies buried in the original series' darker corners, a path not taken because of one character's fateful decision to betray Starfleet. That character is Gary Mitchell, Captain Kirk's old Academy friend, who tragically turned traitor to humanity after his godlike transformation in Where No Man Has Gone Before. But here's the theory: if Gary Mitchell had not succumbed to corruption, if he had remained the loyal and ambitious officer we meet before the galactic barrier altered his fate, he could very well have become the first officer of Kirk's Enterprise replacement. It's a theory worth exploring not just for its dramatic potential, but because it fits perfectly into the undercurrents of ambition, loyalty, and destiny that run through Star Trek. Mitchell wasn't just a footnote in Kirk's early missions. He represented the kind of officer who might have changed the shape of Starfleet history. Gary Mitchell, a forgotten Starfleet rising star. When Where No Man Has Gone Before first aired in 1966, Mitchell was introduced as a close companion of Kirk, someone who not only studied with him at the Academy, but also helped shape the man who would become one of Starfleet's greatest captains. Kirk trusted him implicitly, something Star Trek rarely showed outside of Spock and McCoy. Before his corruption, Mitchell had every quality Starfleet looked for in a future leader. He was bold, confident, competent under pressure, and utterly loyal to Kirk. In fact, Mitchell often filled the role of Kirk's sounding board during the Enterprise's early voyages. If Spock was Kirk's logic and McCoy his conscience, Mitchell was Kirk's mirror, the representation of what Kirk himself might have been without the burden of command. Starfleet's career pipeline made it almost certain that someone like Mitchell would one day sit in a command chair. And as history later showed with officers like Riker, Spock, and Kieran Nares, the natural trajectory for a capable officer orbiting a strong captain was to become a first officer. So why not Mitchell? Why not the man who shared Kirk's Academy days, who knew him better than anyone, as the logical choice to stand at his captain's side? The Enterprise's next era, who would lead after Kirk? To understand this theory, we have to ask, who was supposed to replace Kirk eventually? The Enterprise was never meant to be synonymous with one captain. Starfleet vessels were generational in purpose. They lasted decades, serving under multiple captains and crews. The Constitution-class Enterprise was no different. Kirk may have defined it for a golden age, but Starfleet would have had a plan for who followed. In later canon, we know Decker was meant to take command of the Enterprise after Kirk retired, only for the motion picture to muddy that destiny. Riker was also famously pressured to accept command long before he was ready. Starfleet's vision was clear. The Enterprise would remain central to exploration, and its captaincy would always be a political and symbolic choice. Which brings us back to Mitchell. If he hadn't been lost, he was perfectly positioned as Kirk's natural successor, or more plausibly, his first officer during a transitional command. Mitchell had the loyalty, the experience, and perhaps most importantly, the political weight of being one of Kirk's closest allies. Starfleet likes optics, and Captain Kirk's hand-picked number one would have been powerful symbolism. A different fate. If Mitchell never changed, imagine a timeline where the Enterprise never encounters the galactic barrier in Where No Man Has Gone Before. Mitchell continues serving as a trusted bridge officer. His record shows competence, charisma, and ability to navigate Starfleet politics. Instead of dying on Delta Vega, he's commended for bravery and grows into a career officer. By the time Kirk is ready to step down, or even if he's reassigned temporarily, as often happened in Starfleet, Mitchell could have been the perfect candidate to take the first officer role on the Enterprise's next mission. Think of how Spock and Kirk function together: logic and passion, science and instinct. Now imagine Kirk paired with Mitchell, an officer who matched Kirk's daring but brought in the grounding of long friendship. Where Spock constantly balanced Kirk's recklessness with reason, Mitchell would have amplified it, making for a more daring, perhaps riskier, command duo. It could have created a very different Enterprise culture, one where the crew leaned harder into bold action rather than scientific restraint. In Mitchell's first officer era might have looked more like the next generation's Riker-Picard dynamic, two confident leaders constantly testing each other, but always united in loyalty. Why Mitchell turned. Star Trek's warning about ambition. Mitchell's downfall makes this, what if, even more compelling. The galactic barrier didn't create his corruption, it amplified traits that were already there. His arrogance, overconfidence, and latent desire for power were hinted at even before his transformation. Star Trek often warned about ambition unchecked by humility. Khan Noonien Singh represented one form of it, genetic superiority leading to tyranny. Mitchell was another, pure human ambition and ego inflated by cosmic forces. Where Kirk had discipline, Mitchell had indulgence. Where Spock had control, Mitchell had hunger. If Starfleet had promoted him without that tempering influence, Mitchell might have still betrayed the Federation eventually, not through cosmic powers, but through moral compromise. Ambition was both his strength and his curse. This makes the theory bittersweet. Mitchell could have been first officer, but the very qualities that positioned him for greatness also doomed him to destruction. Enterprise legacy with Mitchell. If Mitchell had stayed loyal, the entire legacy of the Enterprise might have been altered. 1. Kirk's command would have shifted. Instead of leaning so heavily on Spock's counsel, Kirk would have had a first officer who echoed his instincts. This could have led to more aggressive missions, higher risks, and possibly different historical outcomes in encounters like the Romulan neutral zone or Klingon confrontations. 2. Starfleet politics. A Kirk-Mitchell team would have been politically explosive. Two golden boys of Starfleet Academy, both commanding the Federation's flagship, could have altered power dynamics in Starfleet Command. Perhaps admirals like Comac and Nogura would have groomed Mitchell for his own captaincy even sooner. 3. The Kirk-Spock dynamic diminished. If Mitchell was first officer, Spock's role might have been relegated more to science officer than to co-command. The iconic Kirk-Spock-McCoy triangle might never have crystallized, and Star Trek's defining philosophical core could have been replaced with a more adventurous action-first ethos. 4. A different Enterprise replacement. When the Enterprise was destroyed, as all great ships eventually are, Mitchell might have been the natural choice to command the replacement, whether Enterprise A or a successor Constitution class. Instead of Kirk handing the torch to a younger crew, Mitchell might have taken over the chair himself. The ripple effect. What if Mitchell survived into the